Assalamu alaikum. I hope you are doing fine. I'm Dr. Muhammad Ali Rabbani, Assistant Professor of Anatomy, and today we are going to discuss the medulla oblongata, especially its cross-sectional anatomy, its internal anatomy. For the details of the external features, follow the video of the where I have discussed the external feature of the brainstem as a whole. There you can see all the external features and nerves exiting from the medulla oblongata. So keeping in that track, let us see. So this is the external picture that we saw for the medulla oblongata. We talked about its anterior median fissure, the pyramids, the olives between, and the hypoglossal nerve between them. Behind the olives, cranial nerve number 9, 10 and 11, the starting part of the medulla as C1 nerve fibers, pyramidal decussation and foramen magnum, and the upper part between the pontomedullary junction. And then we saw the back, where in the lower half we saw fasciculus, gracilis and cuneatus along with gracile and cuneatus tubercles, and in the upper half we saw hypoglossal nerve, tubercle, vagal trigone, vestibular trigone, area proxima and striamedullaris thalami. Striamedullaris, not thalami, sorry. Okay, so this is what we are going to be following. So we are going to see the cross sections at the level of A, that is the level of decussation of pyramid, the great motor decussation. We are going to see that on the level B, that is the decussation of sensory tracts, DCML, the sensory decussation, and third at the level where the inferior olivary nucleus are prominent. And to make sense of things, I will be making one cross section of spinal cord 2 so that we can follow the tracks better. Here I would like to suggest that you pause the video, take out a rough piece of paper and pencil and draw with me. Draw with me and you will have a better chance of retaining the different structures that are as they are going through. So I will be following the tracks and making all of these pictures in parallel. I hope so it will be helpful for you. So this is the picture for our reference and these are the four pictures. This is the picture at the level of the decussation of pyramids. This will be the picture at the level of uh, sensory decussation, and this will be the over picture at the level of decussation at the level of inferior olivary nuclei, and this will be our picture that will be showing the spinal cord. Okay, let us start with the first tract, pyramidal tract, corticospinal tract. Corticospinal tract is coming all the way from cerebral cortex, from corona radiata, internal capsule in the midbrain, crossing the crus cerebri. On the pons it is crossing the base of the pons, and here it is shown here it is crossing the pyramids. It is crossing the pyramids, as you can see. As it comes down you can see it here, pyramids, and at the level of, as it reaches down here, it crosses the midline. Here you can see it crossing the midline, and then it travels down as lateral corticospinal tract that you can see in the spinal cord. Let me repeat it again. The corticospinal tract moves up, comes down from the crus cerebri from the base of the pons, and it comes down from the crus cerebri from the base of the pons and the pyramid shown here. It comes down in the pyramid. As it moves down, it comes down and still remain anteriorly, that is shown in this picture, and then at the level of point A it crosses the midline and goes to the lateral aspect. Then you can see it crosses the midline and goes to the lateral aspect, and from the lateral aspect it goes down. As it's on the lateral aspect, it will go down and it will make the lateral corticospinal tract. Yes, there is a small number of fibers that do not cross. These small number of fibers that remain on the same side, they remain near the midline, and these form the anterior corticospinal tract. So we have seen corticospinal tract remain in the pyramid. In the pyramid, cross the midline, goes to the lateral aspect, make the lateral corticospinal tract. Next, let us see the dorsal column medial lemniscus system. Here, this raised area, this is for the gracile tubercle, and this is for the cuneatus nucleus and gracile nucleus. Nucleus gracilis is present here, nucleus cuneatus is present here. Okay, okay, we will follow this track from below upward. Below, it is running in the anterolateral, in the dorsal column. It moves above. Here you can see it is moving above in the dorsal column. As it moves up, it continues to move in the dorsal column as it is going through the pyramidal decussation level. You can see it right here. And then as we move up in the upper end, it synapses with the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. Here you can see it here. It moves up, it raises here, and then its fiber come and synapse with the second order neurons of the dorsal column medial lemniscus system, that are the nucleus gracilis medially and nucleus cuneatus laterally. If you need to freshen it, gracilis is getting fibers from the lower limb and cuneatus is getting fiber from upper limb, more specifically from T5 above. Now, the fibers from these, they will cross the midline as internal arcuate fibers. They will cross the midline as internal arcuate fibers, and then they will move up as medial lemniscus. And medial lemniscus will be seen in this picture C, and they will move up as medial lemniscus after crossing, and they will continue to go up, and as it go up it will continue to move a little laterally, and then it will go through the internal capsule, corona radiata, and it will reach the cerebral cortex, posterior central gyrus. So this is about the fasciculus, gracilis and cuneatus. It started from the posterior column of the spinal cord. For the further details, I would refer you to the video of spinal cord ascending tracts that is present in the same playlist, and you can see the discussion of dorsal column in detail here. It moves up from the lowermost segment of the medulla oblongata, and then the fibers, as it goes a little up, the fibers exit it and they join the and they synapse with the fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. They synapse with the nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus. These are the second order neuron or the dorsal column medial lemniscus system. The axons of these second order neurons, nucleus gracilis and cuneatus, they cross the midline, and the crossing midline fibers are known as internal arcuate fibers, and these are crossing each other. This is also known as sensory decussation. Yes, decussation of DCML tract, and it will move up at dorsal at medial lemniscus. Hence the name dorsal column medial lemniscus system. Next one, spinothalamic tract. Spinothalamic tract had two parts, anterior and lateral spinothalamic tract. We will be discussing them as a unit. Anterolateral spinothalamic tract. This is the tract that had already crossed the midline. It had, after getting signal, it had already synapsed with the neuron here. It had crossed the midline here, and it had moved up, and at that point we saw it right here in the anterior and lateral white column, anterolateral spinothalamic tract. And it has already crossed, it will not cross the midline, it will simply continue to go up, and you have to keep in mind it stays a little away from the midline and it remains there till it goes to the thalamus, there it synapses there, and then it goes to the internal capsule and all the way up to the cerebral cortex. So these are the things that are going to see here. This is the anterior aspect, anterolateral aspect in the spinal cord. At the level picture A, you will see here it is going on the lateral aspect of lower part of medulla. then you will see it on the lateral aspect of upper part of the medulla, then you will see it continuing on the lateral aspect of the upper part of the medulla. For those of you with a keen eye, you must have seen that here it has changed its name to spinal lemniscus as opposed to the anterior and posterior spinothalamic tract. So what happens is that anterior plus posterior spinothalamic plus spinotectal, the one that is taking the signal to the the superior peduncles, superior colliculi. So these three forms the spinal lemniscus. So that can be repeated on the opposite side. Go with me. These are the anterolateral spinothalamic tract. As we go up, you can see it on the lateral aspect at the level of pyramidal decussation. You will see on the lateral aspect at the level of sensory decussation, and you will see it on the lateral aspect at the level of inferior olivary nuclei. Next, let us talk about spinocerebellar tracts. There were two spinocerebellar tracts, if you remember from the spinal cord lecture. One is the posterior spinocerebellar tract. After synapsing with the Clark's nuclei, the posterior spinocerebellar tract, it went up and it exited the medulla from the inferior cerebellar peduncle. And then there was anterior spinothalamic tract, spinocerebellar tract, that crossed the midline here, went up through the tract, went all the way up to the medulla, to the midbrain, and from there it descended down to the cerebellum, and from the cerebellum it crossed the midline to reach the cerebellum here. So when we are going to see at these two levels, this level, we are going to see both posterior and anterior spinocerebellar tracts. However, when we are going to see at the level C, at the level higher up, we are only going to see anterior spinocerebellar tract because it is on the way up to the midbrain. We will not see posterior spinocerebellar tract. So that's what happens here. Let me show you. Here is the anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tract going in the lateral aspect of the spinal cord. Here in this case option D, it moves up. Here anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tracts seen again at level A. Here anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tracts seen at this point, but here you can only see inferior spinocerebellar tract because the posterior spinocerebellar tract had exited the medulla by going into the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So by this way it goes and exits the medulla oblongata, so you do not see it on this level. Let's do it again on the other side. Anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tract going here, then anterior and posterior spinocerebellar at the level of pyramidal decussation, anterior and posterior spinocerebellar tract at the level of sensory decussation, and only anterior spinocerebellar tract seen at the level of inferior olivary nuclei because the posterior one has gone to the inferior cerebellar peduncles. Next, the medial longitudinal fasciculus. This is a tract that connects the extraocular muscles, all three extraocular muscle nuclei. So there is oculomotor nerve, cranial nerve number 3, there is cranial nerve number 4, that is the trochlear nucleus, and there is cranial nerve number 6, that is the abductor nuclei. So it joins all three of them, and it joins them with the hearing centers, the cochlear nuclei, and it joins them with the vestibular nuclei, and it helps them the coordinated movement of all of these nuclei, the coordinated function of these nuclei for the conjugate eye movements. For example, when you are looking at one side, I am looking to the right now. At this point, when I am looking to the right, on one eye, sixth cranial nerve nucleus is involved for the lateral rectus. On the other eye, third cranial nerve nucleus involved for the medial rectus. So this medial longitudinal fasciculus, this maintains this coordination. Sometimes when you move the head suddenly like this and you have eyes fixated on one point, and your eyes, as it goes to the one side, your eyes immediately go to the other side. This is the vestibular reflex. So these are the reflexes. These are carried through the medial longitudinal fasciculus. Even some reflexive movement that are connecting between the eye and the upper axial skeletal muscles. So these are connected through these medial longitudinal fasciculus. Throughout the brainstem, you will see it just in front of the CSF containing cavity. Here is the fourth ventricle. Here is the central canal, and as it goes to the spinal cord after decussation, it is pushed a little to the lateral aspect. But in all of the slides above the pyramidal decussation, you will see it just anterior and near the midline and just anterior to the CSF containing cavity. That is the central canal here, fourth ventricle here, and it will move up. You will see the cerebral aqueduct in the midbrain. Then there is tectospinal tract. Tectospinal tract is a tract that starts from the superior colliculus, crosses the midline, goes down, and its function is to make movements in axial muscles in response to visual stimuli. For example, I am sitting right here. Suddenly, something flashes on my right hand side. I suddenly move my axial skeleton, move my head towards that side. So from superior colliculus, the signal has come down, and the visual stimulus has sent the signal through tectospinal tract to the spinal cord to respond to that. These are called tectospinal reflexes, visuospinal reflexes. So you can see tectospinal tract in the uppermost part, and you can see in some books tectospinal tract is also drawn here along with medial longitudinal fasciculus. It will be formed somewhere here. Tectospinal tract will be somewhere here. It will be formed. Okay. So tectospinal tract, it will be somewhere here. Next is the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. This is the spinal trigeminal nerve. It is entering the anterior surface of the pons, but as we'll see in the lecture of the pons consist of three sensory nuclei, the mid one in the pons, one going up in the mesencephalon, and the one going downwards in the medulla oblongata. So the fibers, the sensory fibers that are coming, they enter here, they move down, and then they synapse at the appropriate place in the nucleus. So this moving down fibers, these are called spinal tract. So you will see spinal tract right here. Moving down, you will see it right here and here, and this nucleus you will see at all the levels. You can see it right here and in this level and at this level. So these are the spinal tract and spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. This nucleus starts from the above pontomedullary junction, starts from pons actually, and goes down all the way down to roughly C3, sometimes C4, 5 vertebra. Spinal segments is a better word for that. So these are the spinal nucleus of trigeminal nerve. Okay, then there is reticular formation that you can draw here, and reticular formation is the, let me give me a second. Reticular formation is a collection of different diffuse cell bodies and fibers. It has further types of nuclei and cell bodies too, but that's not our scope of discussion today. This reticular formation is more prominently seen on the upper sections of the medulla oblongata as compared to the lower sections. And there are olivary nuclei, and that is why this area was called the olives. That raised area, that forward protruding area, that was called the olives. It is a set of four nuclei: superior, inferior, lateral, medial. The inferior one, the lower three ones, apart from superior, are present in the medulla oblongata. The superior one can be seen in the sections of the pons. This large one, inferior olivary nucleus, it's the largest one, and it is like a crumpled bag of chips, and that whose mouth is towards the midline. So this is the inferior olivary nucleus, and it is responsible for the giving signals to the cerebellum. There is in spino-olivary tract that starts from the spinal cord. After relaying in the spinal cord, crosses up, comes here, and its synapses here with the inferior olivary nucleus. And from there, it goes through inferior cerebellar peduncle, crosses the midline, and goes to the cerebellum. So it goes. I have not drawn these fibers, but here the axons exit like this, and they go to the inferior cerebellar peduncle to the cerebellum. So these are the olivocerebellar tracts, yeah, fibers. So, and of course it will be true for the other direction too. So this is about the inferior olivary nucleus, and apart from inferior olivary nucleus, that can be seen in the lower aspects too, but most prominent is on the upper aspect that we have made the section at the level of inferior colliculus. It is seen here. On the dorsal aspect, will be a dorsal, there will be dorsal accessory olivary nucleus, and on this aspect there will be medial accessory olivary nucleus. That leaves us with a few cranial nuclei that are still remaining. Let us start with that. So this is the nucleus for on the lowest most part. It's technically almost not a part of brainstem. On the lowermost part there is a nucleus. This is a nucleus for spinal part of accessory nerve. That is the nucleus for spinal part of accessory nerve, spinal part of cranial nerve number 11. And it has a very unique exit. All of the axons of the motor nerves in the spinal cord, they exit anteriorly from the anterior horn. However, in this case, the nucleus, that is the cells that are present, they exits like this, literally direct on between the anterior and posterior roots. So this is the, as you can see, on the only on the lowest most part of the medulla at the level of pyramidal decussation, you will see the spinal nucleus of trigeminal, giving rise to cranial nerve number 11 as it exiting from the lateral aspect of medulla. It can be seen on a little above here, but will not be visible on the upper part. But the point to ponder is that the axons are exiting on the lateral aspect. Then is the nucleus for the tongue, hypoglossal nucleus, cranial nerve number 12. It is present just near the CSF on the two sides of the central canal. As move up, it retains its position. So it is present on the level of sensory decussation, and it exits, if you remember, between the pyramids and the olives at the junction of these two. And you can see it right here too. It is present just near the midline in front of the fourth ventricle, and it goes on axons and exits between the pyramid and the olives. So this is the hypoglossal nerve, hypoglossal nucleus and hypoglossal nerve. Let's go on this line. On just to the lateral of the hypoglossal nerve is another nucleus, that is dorsal vagus nucleus. Dorsal vagus nucleus, it's basically dorsal vagus nucleus. It is the parasympathetic. This is a parasympathetic nucleus of cranial nerve number 10. So all of the parasympathetic supply that is going through the vagus nerve, that is supplying most of the thorax, most of the abdomen till the transverse colon. So all of this is coming from this parasympathetic. This general visceral efferent type of fiber are coming from dorsal vagus nucleus. Next, on its lateral aspect, there is solitary tract. Solitary tract along with nucleus. It has a tract here and the nucleus along with it. Solitary nucleus is the one that is responsible for sensations from viscera. Sensations from viscera. So what sensation? General sensation and special sensation. So general visceral afferent, special visceral afferent. These are the general sensations like abdominal stretch, fullness of stomach, blood pressure, hypertension, amount of carbon dioxide in blood through carotid bodies, carotid sinus, taking blood pressure, and a lot of other visceral sensations. So these are reaching the solitary nucleus. Special visceral afferent. Technically, special visceral afferent contains taste and smell, but smell has nothing to do with hair. So hair solitary nucleus, it is responsible for receiving the taste fibers. Special visceral afferent fibers, the taste fibers from glossopharyngeal, the taste fibers from the anterior two-thirds of the trunk through facial, and even the taste fibers from the vagus nerve. So these are the solitary nucleus. And from the solitary nucleus, after relaying, the fibers will move up through the solitary tract and they will reach the ventro-posterior nucleus of the thalamus and so on. So that is about the solitary nucleus. Then there is very important nucleus. This is the nucleus ambiguous. Here is the nucleus ambiguous. This is the nucleus that supplies the muscular component of cranial nerve number 9, cranial nerve number 10, and cranial portion of cranial nerve number 11. So this is a special visceral efferent type of fibers, and they are among them, I'm not breaking them down between the cranial nerves, and among them they are going to supply the palate, they are going to supply the pharynx, and they are going to supply the larynx. Palate, pharynx, larynx. If the palate does not work, if you drink water, the fluid will go into your nose. If this is called nasal regurgitation. If the pharynx does not work, you cannot swallow. You will have difficulty in swallowing. That is called dysphagia. If the larynx is not working, then you cannot produce sound very prominently. You cannot speak. Dysphonia and dysarthria respectively. And even due to that, the protection from above the trachea will be removed, and when drinking water the fluid will go into the trachea. That is nucleus ambiguous. And you, through these four nuclei, nucleus ambiguous, dorsal vagus, solitary, and spinal nucleus of trigeminal, they all send fibers to make up cranial nerve number 9 especially, 10 especially, and 9 too. In the ninth case, in the cranial nerve number 10, the dorsal vagus nucleus is replaced by inferior salivatory nucleus. Sometimes you are asked what are the fibers coming through them. So vagus nerve is being made by the special visceral efferent fibers coming from nucleus ambiguous that is going to supply the muscles. General visceral efferent parasympathetic fibers that is going to give the parasympathetic supply. Sensory special visceral afferent receiving taste. General visceral afferent receiving general sensation from viscera, and general somatic afferent, some general sensations coming from some, say, the ear, that are going to reach the medulla. So that's about it. And then we are left with the nuclei for the hearing. The anterior and posterior cochlear nuclei, they are present between the medulla and pons. You will see both of these nuclei in both the medulla and the pons, and they are present on either side of inferior cerebellar peduncle. So these are anterior and posterior cochlear nuclei. The cochlear nerve, as we will see in the cranial nerves, after bipolar cell, the axon will come and will synapse here, and from there it will cross the midline in trapezoid body and go up. So that is the cochlear nuclei. and then there is vestibular nuclei. There are four vestibular nuclei: medial, lateral, superior, inferior. In the in this in the medulla, if you see, you will see medial and lateral. If you are at the uppermost part, and if you are a little lower, you will see medial and inferior. So these are the vestibular nuclei that are present here. And last but not the least, these are the arcuate nuclei. These are the downward displaced pontine nuclei, and these are making a relay center for corticopontocerebellar tracts. The signal coming down from cortex, relaying here in the pons, the signal coming down from the cerebral cortex, relay here in the pons, and then through the pontine nuclei it crosses the midline and goes to the cerebellum. So this is called corticopontocerebellar tract. However, sometimes some of these pontine nuclei, these are displaced downwards. These are called arcuate nuclei. These are called arcuate nuclei. So the same track, the signal will come here, synapse here, and they will cross the midline and go to the inferior cerebellar peduncle. So these are the arcuate nuclei. Regarding arcuate nuclei, you will see two more additional figures. Some after crossing the fibers can go to the cerebellum in one of the two ways. By the way, this nuclei is majorly seen on the upper part of the medulla rather than the lower part, and hit the fibers, the pontocerebellar fibers, or these fibers coming from the arcuate nuclei on the way to the cerebellum. They go in one of the two ways. Some fibers exit from the anterior, and along the surface of the anterior they go all the way till they reach the cerebellum. These are called anterior external arcuate fibers. Anterior external arcuate fibers. So these are the fibers that go like this. Actually, it will be on the from the opposite side, and then there are fibers that will go through the back, and from here they will go to the cerebellum. So these are called stria medullaris. So these were the fibers that we saw, the horizontally running fibers on the back aspect of the medulla oblongata, that was demarcating the junction between medulla and pons. Stria medullaris. So that's it. That was it. That's the internal structure, that is the cross-sectional anatomy of the medulla oblongata. Thank you so much for staying till now. If you have any questions, suggestions, feedback, please mention down in the comments, and do follow us on our social media handles and subscribe to us for more upcoming lectures. And now we will be following this lecture with the cross anatomical structure of pons, the cross anatomical structures of anatomy of medulla and midbrain, and then we will discuss the lesions and how to discuss this lesion. And if not followed, we have the lectures of general anatomy of nervous system and the detailed lecture series of the spinal cord too, completely freely available on the YouTube. Please look at that if you are interested. Thank you so much. See you in the next time. Till then, Allah Hafiz.